Hi, I'm Carrie Elizabeth Lynn. I'm a licensed professional counselor and I also have bipolar disorder myself. Today I'll be giving you a broad overview of bipolar disorder symptoms, including how the kinds of symptoms you've had translate into a diagnosis. I'll include where the criteria for a diagnosis come from, the types of mood episodes, and the main types of bipolar disorder. I've noticed that many people with bipolar disorder don't have a basic understanding of what it is. For instance, many people don't know what type of bipolar disorder they have. I think it's the responsibility of mental health providers to help their clients understand their diagnoses, but unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. I think I was fortunate in that I had studied psychology pretty extensively by the time I was diagnosed. So I already had a pretty good understanding of bipolar disorder. Initially, that wasn't a good thing because I was quite devastated that I had what I learned was a pretty serious illness, but ultimately, I think it benefited me. Bipolar disorder thrives on ignorance, and in my experience, the better you understand it, the more control you have over it. So, in this series of videos I'm doing called Speaking of Symptoms, my goal is to help you understand it better. So, first, let's talk about where the criteria for a diagnosis even come from. The organization that decides what symptoms result in a diagnosis in the United States, as well as many other parts of the world, is the American Psychiatric Association. They publish this book, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, which is updated every so often and is currently in its fifth edition. Most mental health providers in the US have a copy and use it to arrive at a diagnosis for their clients. The DSM isn't the only way of understanding bipolar disorder. In Europe, they tend to use the International Classification of Diseases, or ICD, which is put out by the World Health Organization. It has somewhat different classifications and criteria. There's also a very different way of understanding bipolar disorder called the spectrum approach. It places people with depression on a bipolar spectrum rather than categorizing them as having or not having bipolar disorder. In reality, how we conceptualize bipolar disorder and decide who has it isn't set in stone. But for now, I'm going to stick with what the DSM has to say. In the DSM, there are a group of disorders called bipolar and related disorders. I'll cover three of those diagnoses in this series: bipolar 1 disorder, bipolar 2 disorder, and cyclothymic disorder. The type of bipolar disorder you have is based on the types of mood episodes you have or haven't had. The possible types of mood episodes are manic episodes, hypomanic episodes, and major depressive episodes. In previous versions of the DSM, there were also something called mixed episodes, where someone has symptoms from both ends of the pole during the same time period, but those were removed from the fifth edition, which came out in 2013. There's still a way of specifying when someone has a mood episode with what are called mixed features, but there's no longer a distinct type of episode called a mixed episode. So a manic episode is a period when you have symptoms related to an elevated, expansive, or irritable mood and increased activity or energy, and those symptoms are severe enough to cause a marked impairment in life functioning. A hypomanic episode has the same symptoms as a manic episode, but it doesn't need to last as long to be diagnosed, and it isn't severe enough to cause a marked impairment in life functioning. And a major depressive episode is a period when you have symptoms related to a sad, empty, or hopeless mood, or in children, the mood can be irritable, or a loss of interest or pleasure in nearly all activities. And those symptoms cause significant distress or impairment in functioning. So, how does the type of episodes you've had determine your diagnosis? Well, to be diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, you have to have had at least one manic episode. To be diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, you have to have had at least one major depressive episode and one hypomanic episode, and you cannot have had any manic episodes. And to be diagnosed with cyclothymic disorder, you cannot have had any manic episodes, hypomanic episodes, or major depressive episodes. You have to have had both hypomanic and depressive symptoms, but not to the extent that you've met the criteria for a mood episode. And you have to have had the symptoms for a long period of time. So that's an overview of the kinds of symptoms involved in different mood episodes and the major types of bipolar disorders. I'll go more into depth on types of mood episodes and types of bipolar disorder in other videos. Thanks for watching, and here's to good mental health.